Good morning and welcome to the second of our World Quality Week webinars. So far this week, we've enjoyed a whole range of activities and some really engaging content, both from the CQI, but most especially from our member groups, branches, SIGs, etc. So I'd encourage you to have a look in the members area of the website and see what's been going on. And also share with us via social media on your own World Quality Week activities. The theme for this week, as I'm sure you all know, is sustainability, improving our products, people and planet. And we're really pleased today to be able to welcome Greg Watson. Before we start off, just a couple of notices. This webinar will be recorded and a recording will be placed in the members area of the CQI website. Now, throughout the webinar, please feel free to ask any questions you may have using the questions function in the control panel of GoToWebinar. And at the end of Greg's presentation, we'll have the opportunity to go through some of those questions and dig into some of these subjects in a bit more detail. So I'd encourage you to use that. The slides from this, along with any other documents in PDF form, can be accessed via the handout function in the GoToWebinar control panel. And there will be links there also to further information and how you can contact us and Greg for further discussion. Now, I'm sure Greg needs no further introduction. Safe to say that we're very grateful that he's made the time to join us here. And I'd like to hand over to him now to talk about how quality actions can enable the move to a habitable environment. Greg, over to you.
Thank you, Alex. And it's a pleasure to join CQI and to celebrate this year's Quality Week. And in particular, I believe today is formally Quality Day. Today's presentation is going to try to put this whole idea of sustainability in some perspective and also act as a call to action for the quality community. Sustainability is something that's been very near to my heart since over a decade now. I am a member of the Board of Advisors of the Climate Leadership Coalition in Finland, which is a group of approximately 90 CEOs in Europe. Which is a business consortium to forge action in this dimension of climate change. And hopefully we'll be able to engage you all in taking definite action, not just making promises or issuing platitudes about the environment, but realizing that now's the time to do something. So I'd like to begin by just showing this picture of the Earth from NASA's perspective. And this has been color-coded so that we take a look at this and we start seeing what should be green Africa looks just like the desert in Saudi Arabia and the Arabian Peninsula. And this reminded me of this poem from Robert Burns, To a Louse. He said, "Oh, the gift that God could give to see ourselves as others see us." Do we really want the world in the future from an external viewpoint to look like this? Don't we want to see this blue and green Earth that we have cherished, I think, is the image. And when I think about this, when we look at the future, where could we actually create such a different view, if you will, a more futuristic view of the world? And we start seeing that maybe the green comes back and we start regenerating life in a different way. And sure, we have some deserts and there probably will always be some deserts. But we've seen a major shift in what's happened because of global heating. And we need to start doing something different about it. I want to go back now to one of the books that I read in the 1960s. It was called The Limits to Growth. It was by Donella Meadows and her colleagues in the Club of Rome. And she wrote in a 30-year update this quotation. So I'd like to read it to you and use this as setting this perspective. She said, "People don't need enormous cars. They need admiration and respect. They don't need a constant stream of new clothes. They need to feel that others consider them to be attractive. And they need excitement and variety and beauty. People don't need electronic entertainment. They need something interesting to occupy their minds and emotions. and so forth. Trying to fill real but non-material needs for identity, community, self-esteem, challenge, love, joy with material things is to set up an unquenchable appetite for false solutions to never satisfied longings. A society that allows itself to admit and articulate its non-material needs and define non-material ways to satisfy them would require much lower material and energy throughputs and would provide much higher levels of human fulfillment. You know, I'm reminded of a comment by Dr. Deming where he was talking about why do we work? And we work for joy of life. And I keep coming back to this idea. What is the reason for this? And we have now this week and these 2 weeks in Glasgow, COP26. And COP stands for the Conference of the Parties under the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change, UNFCCC. Now that sounds like a government acronym because, well, it is. But this is the 26th year of their meetings. And I've been thinking about this, and as I've been reading some of the news, and I said, what should quality's role be in this system? Now, this was first signed in 1992 at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil by 154 nations, and it was intended to rein in dangerous human interference with the climate system, primarily by stabilizing greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere, whose unchecked dispersion drives global heating. And I look at this and I say, well, this is an interesting desire to have. And what we saw in this is that this 197 signatories actually to this document hope to make their voices heard to see a comprehensive plan drawn up to realize the goals of the 2015 Paris Agreement and avert climate catastrophe that our planet faces. Well, as we keep looking at this, we have to realize that that actually didn't really set any fixed goals. So the first significant agreement between the parties was actually the Kyoto Protocol, which was signed in 1997. And this set strict emission reduction targets on 6 gases for 37 industrialized nations and the European Union, but China, US, and India were excluded. Russia and Canada ratified the protocol in 2005, aimed to reduce these harmful emissions by 5% from the 1990 levels in phase 1 by 2012, and by an ambitious 18% in phase 2 by 2020. However, in 2012, this was the Doha Amendment. So what was the result? The result was that the emissions did not decline, but in fact, between 1990 and 2010, they increased 32%, despite the, if you will, efforts, I'm putting efforts in quotes, of the protocol's participants. So in other words, good words, good promises, good intentions, but no action. So this was a failure. Not even the best efforts, if you will, were expended by the agreement signatories. And so I look at this and I say, well, this is all sorts of promises. It's not about actually achieving performance. So promises will get you nothing. So the Paris Agreement goals in 2015 were signed in April 2016, and this was the successor to the Kyoto Protocol. And here we see all 195 signatories, not just the developed nations, obliging everyone to do their part to keep global rise well below 2% by the end of the century, and for all nations to hit net zero emissions by 2050. That means that the emissions we have would be, if you will, at a level where they were consistent with the amount of consumptions of the greenhouse gases in the environment. Additionally, the world's wealthiest countries, including the US and Germany, pledged 100 billion to the world's poorest nations to help them combat climate change. So what do we see now happening? Well, what we see is that COP26 is coming together, and the purpose is to secure global net zero emissions by 2050, keep the Earth end of century rise below 1.5, and protect those communities and natural habitats on the front line of extreme weather caused by this global heating effect. And that we would budget at least 100 billion in climate finance every year and agree on conditions under which the world can work together to tackle this crisis as one. And I think this is interesting because this sounds an awful lot like what we try to do in a company. In an organization, we try to come together and tackle our most severe problems as a system. We take a look and say, how do we actually do this? We form teams and we interrelate those teams together on common goals. They're looking at mutual benefits, shared objectives, and then they're trying to work together to make that happen. But what's been the result? There's an old saying that in America about called kicking the can down the road. And so this is an American cartoon. And we see what we talk about kicking the can down the road means that we're trying to avoid or delay dealing with a problem. And we especially do it by using some short-term solution in hopes the final solution will become somebody else's problem. And this defers action to popular or political ramifications that are the consequences of required action. It's not nice to try to be going to net zero by 2030 because many people would suffer. People who own stocks, people who have cars that need to be replaced, people that would have to invest in their types of environmental situations to clean up the mess that we've already made. So what do we see? Let's take a look at some data. Since we're quality professionals, we should take a look at this. First thing is what we typically do is we look at what happened. And so the first chart we see is this focus on what happened. And this is the average increase in terms of these greenhouse gases. And what we see is the 5-year average and the 10-year average. And notice that up until 1950, the 5-year average and 10-year average, the 5-year average was just dampened when we showed it as a 10-year average. But now what do we see is that the 5-year average is actually advanced ahead of. So the blue line is above the red line, and the red line is not intersecting it. That means that it's moving faster than the long range, if you will, moving average. And then we see that's what happened. That's the hindsight look. But it doesn't tell us what could happen because that curve seems to be accelerating in the slope. So that means that the rate of change is getting much faster. So if we take a look at this, we start seeing on the second chart here, this is focused on what can happen. So here we see this black is the observations we've had, and then the red line are what the climate models are telling us, and the IPCC is the blue line, and that's the UN formal prediction. And they're estimating this 1.5 degrees centigrade global heating level. It's going to happen actually earlier than projected. So IPCC is saying it's going to happen somewhere around 2040, and we see it's actually going to happen somewhere around 2030. And so this is actually saying that this acceleration indeed is happening. And when we start taking a look at the modeled effects, not just a projection from the historical effects, we start seeing that this actual acceleration is indeed happening, and we will see it by 2030, not just 1 decade away. And if we take a look at some other data, we start seeing here are all the projections. So this is now where we start seeing the scenarios, if you will, for what's going to happen. So scenario 1 is saying that the emissions don't really peak. And so what we start seeing is that we see this rate of change happening here, and we start seeing, oh, here's 2 degrees happening here, and then we see 2.5, 3 degrees happening here. But at this level here, we're seeing basically we're going to have this 2-degree level happening, and that's going to happen by 2060. And so, or start happening maybe in 2050, depending on how we choose the curves that we're going to be forecasting ahead. But notice the 3 scenarios that are chosen. These are not my scenarios. I wouldn't do scenario planning like this. But scenario 1 is well below all of those blue lines up above. So it's not the totally pessimistic or doomsday type of scenario one would normally use for scenario planning. Scenario 2 is the Paris Accord plus additional actions that have not been agreed or even identified. And scenario 3 is radical action plus negative emissions. This is what some people call the ban environment, where we just say you cannot do these things. And only this one is the one that actually gets us to this net zero, if you will. And so we start saying, well, what does it actually mean? You know, how do we actually project the risk that we have to society? What can we do about these things? And so as we take a look at this, we start seeing that global increasing has had many side effects. And just to talk about one, and that's this idea of the increased sea levels. So up until the turn of the century, we basically were using these tide gauges, if you will. So these are measured gauges about what's happening with this increase in sea level at different times, and it's all been corrected, if you will, for what we see for tides and shift of the moon and so forth. But the IPCC projections look like this. And so this is this gray zone here. But if we take a look at the most accurate systems we have, which are the satellite observations of the Earth, and we start seeing, well, those actually are very tightly measured. This is very good data, and it's basically starting somewhere around 1994, 93, and what we start seeing is it's well above what the IPC and the tide projections are. It's following this, but the IPCC projections are much more conservative than what the data is saying. And so that says that we are underestimating the effects of sea rise based on this data observation. And we're not projecting in the past here. We're actually looking at what's happening or what has happened up to 2010. Now, in the most recent thing, we've been seen talking about all the different tipping points. And so these are this degradation or the progressive degradation of hothouse Earth. And what that means is that these are points beyond which there is no return. And so we see basically the tipping points of 1 to 3 degrees centigrade. So what's that? Western Antarctic ice sheet is melting. Well, we've seen that. Greenland ice sheet is melting. We've seen that. Arctic summer sea ice is melting. We've seen that. Alpine glaciers are melting. Yes, we've seen that. Coral reefs are being decimated. We've seen that. So all of these things no longer are, if you will, projections, but they're actually real effects. And then we start seeing this 3 to 5 degrees. So we start seeing the Burrell Forest degradation in this area of northern Canada and Alaska. El Nino southern oscillation in terms of the El Nino effect, which is the ocean effect off of there. Thermocline circulation, this is what generates the hurricanes. That's been increasing. The Amazon forest is depleting. And the jet streams are changing. We start seeing these other changes, the Indian summer monsoon effects getting stronger. And then finally, at greater than 5, we start seeing Arctic winter sea ice disappearing, permafrost defrosting, and that then releases methane gas into the atmosphere. And then we start seeing the East Antarctic ice sheet. So what's happening is we're seeing this global warming effect. One of those outcomes will indeed be this increase as the oceans warm, they become higher in volume. The Arctic ices and the ice caps that stores energy in a solid form begin to melt, and the general effect is the sea will rise. But that's only one effect. We also see that because there's so much more water there, we'll start seeing much more severe weather, because that's what this idea of humidity or the water in the air creates more severe environmental effects. And so what we start seeing is there is clearly a systemic effect happening as a result of this global heating process that we've been going through. And I just want to pause to reflect a little bit on this situation. So we even have to ask ourselves, is CO2 really the metric that we want to talk about when we're talking about greenhouse gases? So the target of holding this to 420 ppm, is that it seems too simplistic. Did we get the right data, and did we get the data right? Is CO2 adequate? So how should all greenhouse gases actually be considered? So CO2 is 80% of that. Methane is 10%, nitrous oxide 7%, fluorinated gas it basically is 3%. And as we start taking a look at this, the Mauna Loa Observatory is only for the 80%. So if we start taking a look, what are all of these other effects? We start seeing that maybe the data we have in hand is not basically the best data, because as we start taking a look at these fluorinated gases actually they're all man-produced, and they all have a much stronger effect than the CO2 does. So how do we interpret this situation? Well, one psychologist that I've been reading, Julie K. Norum, She's written about what she calls defensive pessimism and strategic optimism. It's like the two sides of a coin. And so defensive pessimism is a coping technique that people use who set low expectations for situations regardless of prior successes. And the reason is that these negative expectations are used to alleviate their anxiety about the situations and motivate them to avoid poor outcomes. So in other words, they say, I'm going to keep depressing my goals. They're going to not be very strong because I don't want to be, getting a negative effect because we didn't meet the goals. So that drives us to more conservative goals. The second choice is what she called strategic optimism. And strategic optimists are people who expect things to go well and who do not worry too much about the possibility of any negative outcomes. So they approach situations confidently without having spent too much time beforehand worrying about what could happen. Well, here, what I'm seeing is I would like to see more of strategic optimism in the case when it comes to humanity's dealing with these environmental issues that are now thrust upon us, and not the defensive pessimism which we have seen in the past. So how do we actually move forward? Well, first of all, we have to understand that constant can kicking is a risky business, because what we're saying is, can't solve it today, but maybe my children can. Don't have the technology today, but maybe if we pray long enough, God will give us a technology in the future. And so I'm going to use this equation, which came from Tim Linton's work in 2020, and he calls this an equation dealing with emergency. And he says emergency is risk times urgency, and risk we see is probability and times damage. Okay, so what's the probability something can occur times the damage? Now somebody has suggested to me, we should probably square that. Why? Because we've got these black swan situations. In other words, these things are actually accelerating. They're not just a stable multiplication. And then we multiply this, if you will, by the ratio, and the ratio is about urgency. Its reaction time, is it longer than intervention time? So reaction time is how long we actually take to do something. And then we divide that by intervention, and what we see is how long does it take us not just to react, but how long does the intervention take to take hold? So if we take a look at this, can we actually move to a total non-fossil fuel automotive engine environment in a year? Answer, no, we can't do that. So what is our reaction time? When do we start? Well, if we keep kicking the can down the road, that says the reaction time gets longer. And when the reaction time gets longer than the intervention time, we've lost control of the situation. And this is what we've done now. We have lost control of the situation because we keep going on these promises that are going to be so far out that we can't really do something. Now, if we take a look at this, we can take a look at these risks, because what we see is that this planetary emergency actually does indeed make some sense. So if we take a look at climate sensitivity, we see that the most likely situation is 1.5 to 4.5, and you can judge the amount of likelihood on a probability scale. And we also see that climate sensitivity here can be taken a look in terms of the impact. And the impact is actually relatively low here. The impact starts getting really great at 6 and above, where we start seeing that there is no food for humanity. We can't live in the cities where we have, we can't breathe the air, the water is all polluted. But we start seeing what's actually happening when we move these into a risk environment. We start seeing that the region of the greatest risk is actually occurring here. That means that the greatest impact is happening in this growth here. Now, when I've worked in companies and I take a look at a curve like this is when we start seeing that in a production environment, and I've got a new product coming out, this is the accelerated growth curve that comes as the market forces take control. And so what we worry about in a high technology company is this beginning part. So can we get through that as fast as possible so that this becomes a positive market force? Well, in the environment, this is a negative force. This is creating this emergency because we've kept kicking the can down the road, and we've accelerated this inability to work. So we can no longer underestimate climate risk. That's no longer an option for us. We have to do something differently. Now, I'm reminded by this music when I was a young child, and I call this humanity's remorse. And it was the Doors, When the Music Is Over. Remember this song? What have they done to the earth? Yeah. What have they done to our fair sister? They've ravaged and plundered and ripped her and bit her, stuck her with knives in the side of the dawn, and tied her with fences and dragged her down. I hear a very gentle sound, with your ear down to the ground. We want the world and we want it. We want the world and we want it now. Now? Now. Does this sound like the youth of today calling to us as the adults, saying, hey, it's time for us to do something differently, people. We can't correct all of these problems in the future because they're too great. We have to get them now. You can't kick the can down the road any longer. Now is the time to act. But this brings up a really important question. Whose job is it to manage planet Earth? There is no world planetary manager, if you will. There is no CEO of the Earth. There is no one body that can actually dictate this is the strategy we will follow and make sure that everyone follows through it. So we have to pursue what is relevant for humanity. Clara North made this observation in her writings at the end of the day. She said, in the Amazon, you can walk for days without seeing a tree. In Beijing, the air is the color of a bruise. 3,000 miles of litter floats in the Atlantic Ocean, plastic bags and old nappies bumping against the side of the ships. I sat before a committee in Brussels and they said, what do you want us to do about it? If we change now, we'll destroy our own economies. And I said, you have destroyed your own world. We want the world and we want it now, but we want a good world. We want a clean world. We want a sustainable world. We do not want the world as it's becoming. I think that's the issue. Our world is desperately in need of hope. Hope is a term that was coined by my friend in India, Ram Ramanathan, and it means the health of planet Earth. I define it as doing the right thing the right way at the right time. This is the most basic of all quality behaviors, and that means no can kicking. Do the right thing. Yes, it might cause some problems for some people today, but we have to cope with that problem, not avoid taking the action. And so hope by itself is not enough. One of the people who is very popular in making this argument is Greta Thunberry. She said in her book, no one is too small to make a difference. And I am sorry, but saying everything will be all right while continuing to do nothing at all is just not helpful to us. In fact, it's the opposite of hope. And yet this is exactly what you are doing. You can't just sit around waiting for hope to come. You're acting like spoiled, irresponsible children. You don't seem to understand that hope is something you have to earn. And if you will say that we are wasting valuable lesson time, then let me remind you that our political leaders have wasted decades through denial and inaction. And since our time is running out, we have decided to take action. We have started to clean up your mess, and we will not stop until we are done. The problem is the youth of our world do not have the resources to do this. Those resources are in the hands of the adults. And youth can express their desire to get the world, and they want it now, but they can't do something. Let's take a look at quality again. Good intentions are not enough. Peter Drucker said, management must ask the right question. There is nothing more dangerous than the right answer to the wrong question. Are we asking the right questions about the environment? Drucker also said, preaching only gets you converts on Sunday, but they are sinners again on Monday. Haven't we seen this? All the promises made, and that despite all those promises that by 2020 we'd do something, what happened? 32% increase instead of a decrease. Start with what is right, is what Drucker said, not with what is acceptable. And right now, that's what we have done in the past. We've been only starting with what is acceptable, what we can get through a consensus of people who have conflicting motivations for assuring that we have a change that makes a difference for the future of humanity. Deming said, best efforts and hard work will not suffice. nor new machinery, computers, automation, and gadgets. One could well add that we are being ruined by best efforts put forth with the best intentions, but without guidance of a theory of management for optimization of a system. It's not enough to just do your best or work hard. You must know what to work on. And I think this is part of our problem. We haven't agreed what to work on. The call is really for quality. Cyril Darrington in The Evolution of Man and Society said, every news source from which man has increased his power on earth has been used to diminish the prospects of his successors, our children. All his progress has been made at the expense of damage to his environment, which he cannot repair and he could not foresee. So quality is required for environmental stewardship of our biosphere. Why? Quality profession and the application of science is really focused on continual improvement. It's the only vocation in the world that focuses on improvement of everything. And if we're going to take our profession responsibly, we need to move forward. What does it mean? Well, you probably have heard of the carbon footprint. This is a passive way to define what have we actually produced in carbon in this current year or this session. One of the things that's happened is that in Finland, one of the university here, Lapinranta University of Technology, has created a different way to look at it. They said, let's not look at the footprint, let's look at the carbon handprint. And this is a focus on what have we actually done to remove carbon from our production processes, from our products, from the environment around us. And this is the focus on what can happen. So for those of you who are interested, a survey of the carbon handprint is found at this link here. And when you take a look at the PDF, you should be able to click on it, go right there, and you can take a survey of what is your handprint? What are you actually taking out of the environment, not just contributing to it? And this is an action-oriented approach towards making change happen. And so engage not in retrospective contemplation, what happened in the past, but in creating remediative actions. What can we do now so that we can have the earth now? And this last year, the International Academy for Quality has created a quality manifesto for the 21st century. And we've promoted this around, and CQI has a copy of this. And there's 10 points. And these are things that the quality community needs to do to police itself throughout this decade to bring about the capability to have this type of sustainable environment. And so first is we have to deepen our art and science. So we have to deepen our concept of profound knowledge. We have to embrace these new digital technologies. Doing no harm. Well, maybe that doesn't even go far enough, but that's a start where we start saying there is no harm and we're going to do good for society and the ecology of the planet. We have to extend our scope. We have to think about quality in all sectors, all functions, even in smaller enterprises. How does it all work together? We have to go beyond business and start causing shifts in education, healthcare, environment, and government, not just by having excellent standards, but by actually doing something. And we have to serve our customers. So we have to think about the customers we have, and we should commit to the precedence of satisfying the needs of customers, patients, students as our principal objectives. And in that, we should include not just the latent customers, the ones that we could have who are living today, but also the future potential customers that are yet to come in the world. We have to build strategy the quality way. We have to sensitize our managers and our leadership teams to what are the visions and objectives that we need to have, not just to deal with our internal vulnerabilities and weaknesses or assure harmony, but also to assure we have service for all stakeholders. And that means that we extend for the future of the world, and we have a strategy that works, that is sustainable for the future, not just the coming 3 to 5 years, but for 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, to make sure that there is no damage we're doing. And we have to involve everyone in this universal involvement, if you will, all individuals in the organization, creating ownership for their obligation to make improvement happen. We have to create trust and happiness so people can feel respect, if you will, as they get increased abilities and rise in their understanding of what we can do to make this prosperity happen for all of humanity. And data needs to be part of our daily conversation. We need to be examining data, using data, taking this data that we have to build value for our universe. And finally, we have to embrace these new technologies. Yes, technology will keep coming. Science will keep giving us new methodologies to apply, new tools to give in that system. And they will deal with digital, biological, material sciences, other technologies that are coming. And we have to figure out how do we use those to create a more quality world in the future. So the imperative is we have to change our perspective. My friend in Portugal, Pedro Sariva, and I are writing a paper on macro quality, and we say it's different. Macro quality is about elevating quality concerns to the external relationships of everything, including the interconnectivity of society. What we have done in the past is microeconomic quality, if you will. It's quality within a company and its supply chain. And so when we do that, we no longer think about what's happening outside the supply chain. Taguchi gave us the idea of, this idea of quality loss function, but that is for what is happening after a product leaves. And that's not the focus of most management, except, perhaps within warranty period or some other limiting perspective. But it's not this end-to-end cradle-to-grave situation for our products and services. So as we speak for future generations, we need to consider Greta Thunberry's other comments. She said, we must change almost everything in our current societies. The bigger your carbon footprint, the bigger your moral duty. The bigger your platform, the bigger your responsibility. Adults keep saying we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act. I want you to act as you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if our house is on fire, because it is. We need to do something. So what can a quality perspective contribute? Well, quality has this capability of getting us to focus on goodness. So how do we carve out goodness from amidst the waste in order to assure our planet's survival? We have to engineer or re-engineer a revitalized planet and continuously manage it to assure we have a sustainable future. This new perspective of quality means it's about value improvement. And value improvement here, the customer is everybody. So quality is the persistent pursuit of goodness, coupled tightly with relentless avoidance of badness. It's a concept that focusing on delivering value everywhere for the benefit of all humanity. As in medicine, do no harm is its foundation, but it's not the stopping point. We have to keep moving for improvement. So the Earth is a macro system. If we're not constantly improving everything simultaneously, then we're really reinforcing a condition of systemic degradation. So quality delivers profound knowledge. We have to learn what is truly significant. To accomplish this, we have to develop theory and practice of profound knowledge about our planet and what it means. And we know from Deming that profound knowledge delivers statistical understanding for control of real-world process behavior, so future states can be predictable. It requires development of knowledge, understanding of the system of structures, statistical thinking about process variation, and appreciation for the psychological impact of that systemic change on human behavior in its global cultural environment. So, what actions can you take today? Well, first, let's talk about organizational actions in the duty of care for our planet. And I want to use this 4 acronyms: replace, reduce, reuse, and recycle as the acronym, if you will, for doing this. So first, replace. We have to replace inefficiency in energy with efficiency. This is in our facilities as well as in our commercial transportation systems. We have to reduce greenhouse gases, toxins, and resource consumption. We have to reuse and extend functional life, remanufacture, upgrade products. We have to recycle and convert waste to value, resources, energy, and food. Individual duties of care action for our planet. Replace means inefficiency in energy with efficiency in our dwellings and our personal transportation conveyances. Do we make choices that reduces our carbon handprint? Reduce consumerism of resources. Don't keep just buying things for the sake of buying, but really examine, do we need this? And particularly food and energy. You know, one of the things that I was reading the other day said that the food loss we have from the time that we are talking about the field to the plate is about 70% loss all the way through that process. And that's a lot of food to throw away. Reuse, extend functional life of consumer products. So resist this urge to succumb to fashionable change and start thinking about fashion should not be the generator of financial expenditures, but we should be actually saying, what is the practical or the pragmatic use of our systems that we buy and our capabilities and house the things that we have in our homes. And we have to recycle, convert waste to value. Just means we should monitor our carbon handprint and seek to reduce it or to capture energy losses. So my friend in Australia said, we must all be planetary managers of our shared biosphere. I may not be able to manage the planet, but we should be able to manage within our household. And so we all want a better world. Donatella Meadows in Limits to Growth Update said, sustainability is a new idea to many people. Many people find it hard to understand. But all over the world, there are people who have entered into the exercise of imagining and bringing into being a sustainable world. They see it as a world to move forward, not reluctantly, but joyfully, with a sense, not with a sense of sacrifice, but with a sense of adventure. A sustainable world could be very much better than one we live in today. And this is what we're looking for, a better world. And what does quality produce? It should produce a better world. And so there is a necessity of a planetary advocacy for quality. So I have some quotes from some of my colleagues who've been talking about this. Willy van den Brun from Belgium says, we need to create planetary awareness. And we are equally convinced that quality is necessity for sustainability. Ram Ramanathan in India said, there cannot be quality without the assurance of hope. And there's no possibility for hope, health of planet Earth, without quality to enable it. Tom Steyer, the billionaire in the US, said a different mission-oriented version of capitalism can drive innovation that ultimately helps save the planet from environmental peril. And I imply in this that what we need is quality in the macroeconomic equations, not just limited to the microeconomic equations where it has been limited in the past. Macroeconomics is all about supply and demand. It's not the quality of supply and demand. And so any supply or demand, even if it's waste, counts as a positive good. So macroeconomics principles need to change. And with that, the way we do accounting for them. Roy Duncanson, my friend in Australia, said, ever improving value enables genuine sustainability. Only broad scale action that is constantly creating increasingly better value will improve the health of planet Earth. So all of humanity has a duty of care for our Earth. And this is something that we have to accept as our personal responsibility. Now, one of my quality gurus that I have respected tremendously in my lifetime was the late Kuru Ishikawa. And in his final years, he left the following hope, if you will, and prayer of quality for humanity. This is what he said. He said, quality and related activities be spread everywhere in the world, that quality all over the world be improved, that cost be lowered, that productivity be increased, and that raw materials and energy be saved, that peoples all over the world be happy, and that the world prosper and be peaceful. So inclusive action results in improved quality of life for society. And so quality for humanity is a global social imperative. And as we start thinking about what does this mean, we have now this emergence of quality 4.0 as a challenge to our profession. We have the ESG goals that are coming out that organizations want to place from the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have this whole issue about sustainability and integrated quality system. So the question is, what will we do about it to create the system the way it needs to be for the future, for the sake of the planet Earth? thank you very much. That's the end of my prepared comments. And I think we can open this up now to questions.
Greg, thank you very much. That was very thought-provoking, and I think it's fair to say alarming as needs must in some part of that presentation. And I think really what we've seen here is, the data, a clear articulation of the case for the need for change, which really is inescapable. I also noticed that earlier on in the week, on Monday, we talked through sustainability and managed to reference The Who and David Bowie, and today the Doors. So I think this speaks not only to the excellent taste of the presenters that we've had with us during World Quality Week, but I think it's also a stark reminder, and this is something that you've touched upon a few times, that the situation we're in is not new. This is not something that has occurred in the last few years. We've got a few questions come in, but please do keep dropping them into the question function in GoToWebinar as we go along, and we'll try and get through as many of these points with Greg as we can. First of all, can I just touch on something you said towards the end there? We talked about Quality 4.0, ESG, sustainability, the integration of quality systems. Now, there are a lot of, I suppose, buzzwords, buzz phrases flying around the profession at the moment, and I think Quality 4.0 is one that particularly stimulates debate. Where do you see, if indeed you do see, the link, the synergy between Quality 4.0 and sustainability?
That's a great question, Alex. I think one of I'm going to quote Deming again, deadly diseases, if you will, of our quality community is that we tend to lock on to the new terms that come out or the new methods and tools, and we start seeing how can we apply them, and we start just trying to fit them in. And Quality 4.0, we have to first of all recognize there never was a Quality 1.0, 2.0, or 3.0. And there should never be a Quality 5.0. Quality 4.0 was foisted upon the quality community by the, if you will, Industrial Revolution 4.0 community, because they said we have to have Quality 4.0, and by that they meant a very limited situation, and that was better management of the production data in a discrete production environment. It had nothing to do with humanity. Okay, for instance, it had nothing to do with broadening the definition of quality. And so that limited definition to me was unacceptable. So in 2017, as I gave my first speech on that in Berlin, actually at an ASQ conference. And I said, we have to really start thinking much more broadly about this. Quality 4.0 is what I would say, if I'm talking to an executive about their business, it's a disruptive factor. This technology is coming in, is totally changing the way we need to think and apply tools in the future. It will not apply uniformly to every organization. SME businesses may need a little slice of it, a couple tools and so forth, but can maybe just continue the way they're doing. Larger organizations will find that they can get very big improvements in their organization by using some of these advanced methods. Now, the real problem with Quality 4.0 is I view it as an era, a period of time. And so if we start seeing that if we interpret quality as we would the semiconductor business, there are a number of epochs, if you will, in semiconductor business. The first in the 1940s and 50s, where they created semiconductors from transistors and got this logic, if you will, that allowed you to program those. And then we start seeing the extension of that into computer systems from the 1960s through the, I'm going to say the 1990s, where it was basically sort of a linear programming task. And then we started getting into dynamic programming capabilities in the 90s with object-oriented programming. And we started seeing things changing. And now what we see is that the digital technology has been able to get sensor systems down so they're priced at a point where we can put them into production environment and actually use them with robotic controls or software robots even to make changes. All of that is affecting quality 4.0 in a production environment. And yes, there is also an implication of quality 4.0 in a business environment. And here we see things like the technologies for book recommendations on Amazon, for instance, or getting your favorite preferences about movies, if you will, on Netflix. So all of those are basically AI types of tools that we see that we're actually manipulating, not data per se, but preferences, and trying to understand what are your patterns, if you will. Now, those types of technologies that we see, they can be harnessed in other ways as well. So for instance, what is our preference about the world? What is our preference about the environment? How do we actually start thinking about what we want for the world to be? But that's a totally different perspective than what Quality 4.0 is doing. It's basically allowing us to have a period where we can adapt these tools into our practices, readjust our profession and our capabilities so we can actually cope with that. Now, we're going to see some major changes happening. I'm just going to give a couple of personal examples here. I, for instance, believe that we'll have a fundamental change in how we do standardization. We'll have a fundamental change in how we do measurement and inspection. And these are going to have major impacts on the quality community. But as we start taking a look about sustainability, the question is, when we have these impacts reducing the emphasis of quality professionals, we have another one increasing the need for quality professionals. And that's this whole concept of sustainability and the environmental effect. So what Quality 4.0, I believe, is really doing is it's freeing quality professionals to shift their credentials, to shift their emphasis in their careers, to think more about the issues relative to sustainability and the practice of that in organizations. And so we don't have to be doing some of the boring work that many of us we do it, but we don't necessarily like it. Nobody likes to draft standards, for instance. I have met a couple people, but they never became
they're out there.
There are, yeah. But here's the issue, those standards are actually now self-modifying with software like Celanese, for instance, where you can actually use the software to define the process. And then it can go back and check. And one or two more steps, and it will measure that, and they'll be able to self-audit. And that is actually happening in businesses today and has been for 3 years. So as we start seeing those technologies, we have to really question, what are we doing with our careers? I know this is a big impact of CQI and thinking about your framework and so forth. And I think that is a very appropriate thing to do.
Well, I mean, that brings me on very neatly to a couple of other questions that have come in. I suppose, first of all, I'd just like to pick up on what you said about Quality 4.0 being an era, being a period of time, which I think is a really interesting point. And I suppose it divorces it from the idea that digital transformation is a discrete, time-bound thing that has happened. And Industry 4.0, Quality 4.0, etc., are responses to that. But of course, technology has evolved over time and will continue to evolve over time.
But let me just make one comment about that. Yeah. The digital transition has already happened back in 2008.
Yeah.
All the analog technologies are replaced by 2008. And what we're now seeing is people are getting more pragmatic about how to apply those digital technologies. That's what's really happening.
Yeah. Absolutely. And in that regard, are there any specific skills or behaviours that you think the quality professional needs to move towards to really exploit that and to support sustainability?
Well, I think that there's a number of things. I mean, when I start taking a look at let me project 15, 20 years out from now, that the quality professional of the future will be somebody who does simulation analysis based on data. They'll take real world data of very complex matters, maybe 7, 8 variables at one time, and then start estimating what will be the net effects of that 2 or 3 decades from now. And so they're going to be doing very different types of tasks. And here's a problem. Do we think that data scientists can do that? Well, they can, but they can't. A data scientist is actually looking at specializing in the applications of artificial intelligence or machine learning types of environments, neural networks, or they're becoming, if you will, advanced statisticians in multivariate analysis. The issue is we have to have people who are pragmatic about how do I take that stuff and actually make it work in the real world. And this is where the quality professionals can come in. But that means we also migrate from the production environment to the design environment. We start getting into thinking ahead and creating the futures, not just the hindsight that we've done about past quality, but thinking about how do we create future quality. I think this is going to be a positive change for the quality profession. I can go back any number of people. Ishikawa talked about, that we have hindsight in quality, but we should have foresight. Schuhart said the same thing. Kano did too. And so the whole idea is we have to get ahead of the system. There's an old saying, if you're going to shoot a duck, you don't shoot behind it. You have to shoot ahead of the duck. And that's what we have to do in quality. We have to figure out how do we lead these things to create the future state that we want to have. And that's going to require basically a different set of tools. It's no longer univariate statistics that we've been trained on. It's multivariate statistics. It's much more complex, but that doesn't mean we can't do it.
Sure. Now, in response to that, I can imagine there is a school of thought that might say, well, this isn't the role of the quality profession. We're not there to design, we're not there to innovate. And even when we talk about quality as the pursuit of goodness, the avoidance of badness, as you mentioned earlier, and the role there of the quality professional as the conscience of an organisation, as having that role in trust and guardianship. How would you respond to those who say, perhaps this isn't for the quality professional to master? Design and innovation is outside our scope.
Well, I would say that we have to, there's something called dynamic capabilities in organizations. And the professor is David Teese at UC Berkeley, who's talked about this. He's written a book, actually it's published in the UK by Oxford. And he said dynamic capabilities are those things that create future competitiveness in the organization. I ran across an article the other day that said, interestingly enough, that you can interpret some of these things today as dynamic capabilities, like the Toyota production system, total quality management, and total productive maintenance. And that these are dynamic capabilities. Why? Because the subject matter keeps changing and we keep accelerating as the process changes and the content flowing through the process changes. These are the dynamic capabilities that have to shift with it. And we as quality professionals have to realize that if the daily management system gets so well controlled by an automated system, that we will leave that behind, that the natural progression of our dynamic capabilities as quality professionals will advance into these future states. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. So let me, I don't want to raise this as a panic and say that's going to happen. It won't happen overnight. It will take a period of time, as all these transitions have. But with every new technology coming in, we see there's a new vocabulary coming out. We see there are new things that are happening to challenge us about, ooh, I don't understand what is Perl or what is Python or what is R and so forth. How does that work? What is this thing about machine learning or adaptive neural networks and so forth? I don't know. I don't have it. But what we can say is we have time to learn. And I think the best way to learn is by training the next generation of quality professionals who 20 years from now are going to be the ones in their mid to late 40s that will be the bulk of the people who are leading quality in organizations. I certainly won't be here 20 years. My health is not such that I'll make another 20 years in life. That would make me 93. And if I lived that long, I will probably not enjoy it. But the point is that we have to create the next generations. That's our obligation. That's one thing that really has got my motivation, is to serve as a teacher, to say, everything you've learned, Greg, how can you put it out there in a way that is accessible to people so they can learn and make their own decisions for how they want to take their careers forward? And I think that's the choice. Each of us has our own brand, who we are, what we do. And it's not a dictum for the profession. Each of us has to decide, how will we be a professional? Mary Parker Follett said that the role of a professional requires that we have reciprocity in our change. In other words, the situation around us will change us, and we will change the situation around us. And that is what I think we need to do as quality professionals.
That you know, as inspiring calls to action, calls to arms go, Greg. I think that's probably difficult to top, and you know, it really speaks very clearly to not just the role of the profession, but also to the role of the CQI in what we are and what we do. And I think this is something that we're going to be exploring later on in the week, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But also in the coming months and years as we develop our own understanding and our members' understanding of what we believe the quality profession of the here and now, future-proofed and moving into the future to be. So thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Alex. And I want to just give a huge shout out. I think CQI is moving in the right direction. And I think that your model you have for a framework, it's as good as all models, but you know, you know, some models are useful and all models are wrong. You know, it was sort of I'm re-paraphrasing George Fox, but the point is that we can use that to think and challenge in these different dimensions. What do we need to change? Where are we today? And you're doing that, and I think that is a very laudable activity.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Greg. And I think to everyone who's listening and your colleagues and quality teams within your organisations, you know, what we have to consider during this World Quality Week is, you know, how we can turn you know, words and ambitions into action, how we can affect change in our organisations, in our businesses, in our built and natural environment. So this is the theme that's running throughout World Quality Week. Just to highlight some other areas of some other opportunities to learn and engage with the CQI over the next few days. All these webinars are being recorded and will be available on the members area. You'll also see content from our branches and special interest groups, as I mentioned before. And there's still time to sign up for our session on Friday, which looks at sustainability in the CQI competence framework. This is being delivered in partnership with Catalyst Consulting, which has been working with us on this project. So I'd encourage you to do that. I'd just like to round it off with a couple of announcements. The CQI Sustainability Special Interest Group has launched this week, and its initial focus is going to be on corporate sustainability management. So if you would like to join, the link has been posted in chat. Also, the International Quality Awards 2022 will be taking place on the 23rd of June next year. So please check the CQI website, quality.org, for further information about that. Just one final thing to say, because I don't think it can be said enough. Thank you again, Greg, for a really informative, really engaging and challenging session. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed it. And I'm sure it's given our members plenty to take away with them and consider in their professional development plans and their ongoing engagement with their organisations. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Alex.
And we'll look forward to speaking to you again soon.